Do you remember this cat? I think he certainly remembers you. And he's been doing some dig up on C++, which we'll see right now. Alright, so the cat was like, oh, I don't really wanna have no idea of what I'm doing anymore. So he did some digging up and started to look into C++ and its structure, the coding conventions, its basic types, in order to actually understand what the program is all about. And the language is actually pretty interesting, which corresponds to the masteries number 8 and 9, C++, coding conventions, and the basic types and their use in C++. Alright, so in order to understand what we're doing here, we first need to know what a coding convention is. C++ is a programming language, such as just like Python, Java, HTML, and others. Now, every one of these languages must have like a guide, a set of guidelines to help structure it and standardize it so that, for example, everyone can understand the code that you are writing. So for instance, we have a code right here. Let's save it. Let's go ahead and save it as master3.cpp. And we have the usual, the header, the namespace, and we have a function right here. Int nerd. Alright, so if you take a look at this at first glance, do you know what I'm talking about right here? Okay, so you know I'm making a function which returns an integer and receives an integer, but you have no idea what the function will do. So if you start to look at the code, if these right here were filled with anything really, then you may have a contest. But you should be able to always look at the naming of a function or an integer or any value and say, huh, so that's what it does. For example, what I want to do right here is make a function that can calculate the number of errors that exist in, say, a sum in an array. So this doesn't really tell me much. So why don't I write something more appropriate like num underscore errors? I think I can understand that a little bit more. Can't you? Well, that's one of the convention. So it's one of the few of the many conventions that exist in C++. And that was weird. Well, se va a escuchar todo eso. Well, that is one of the very many conventions that C++ can handle. And right here we have the Google C++ style guides, which is humongous. Just look at the size of this scroll bar. And it does contain some very useful input, like general naming rules. What we're talking about here. Names should always be descriptive. So you should really avoid abbreviation whenever you can, so that you can be as clear as possible. Right here we have the example we just gave you. Int number underscore error. Ner would be pretty weird for someone who is starting to code, and they are gonna be like, what are you doing? I don't understand it. So in order that's what a convention is. Something that makes life easier for everyone. Okay, so that's one type of convention. We can also go ahead and take a look at these includes right here. I can put as many includes as I want. But if I have, say, a simple code, which just says int main, and what it does is output a hello, ends a line, and return 0. If I have that, well, then what am I using CMAT for? It is not very useful to use this library when we don't have any operands with math in it. So it's gonna actually be a lot harder if I go ahead and build and run this. It will build and run. the program, but notice the time it will take. It's not gonna be immediate, and it's just a simple hello. It's just a simple message on the screen. Hello, process time 5.9 seconds. That's a long time. And what if we delete this header? Go ahead and save it, although I didn't really need to do that. And I need to terminate this process and build and run again. Hello! Well, look at that. The execution time was just 0.522 seconds. Not even 1 second passed. So, why does this happen? Because sometimes people include more headers than they really need to. The CMath library is absolutely useless in this example, so you don't need to use it. And there are rules for that as well, that second mention. Do not use includes that are not gonna benefit your code at all. So right now we are transitioning from the C++ coding conventions to our types, or basic types, and what do they do in C++. Right here I open c++.com, very tutorial-esque site, which is very useful, and it tells me that there are identifiers. What's an identifier? Well, it's a sequence of really characters, so basically strings, but just characters which do a specific set of functions. They have really specific functions in the code. We can recognize some of these. They are a lot. We can recognize, for example, the L's. We can recognize long. We can recognize fors, which are used for loops, etc., etc. And so what this is telling us is that in conventions, it is not a good idea to write a function in which, for example, right here, in which I have, I don't know, a float. I want to return a float, and I receive a float which is called float. So what the hell is this? This is not good coding. This is using a confusing compiler, so let's not do that. Please call it B. And alright, we can go ahead and go to types. There are 4 preliminary data types. The first one is the character type, which we know must be between these two commas above, quotation marks, I'm sorry, and they can be an A, lowercase a, or uppercase a. Even a space is a character, so yeah, you know what that is. I already put the integer right there. The numerical integer type, they only store one value, so this x should be equal to, for example, 8, and cannot be equal to, for example, 8.7. This is wrong, so we'll go ahead and do it. That's what we have. Floating point types for, which they say here they can represent real values, but integer types are also real values. What they mean by that is a value which can be decimal, 132. And finally we have the Boolean type, which is a special one, which is, we just write that as bool, and what they represent is only 2 states, true or false. And that's basically that the definitions and the functions of the basic types of C++. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.